If there's one name in rock history that ever reached the summit only to fall straight into the abyss, it's John Corabi. A voice strong enough to revive Mötley Crüe when the whole world turned its back, and honest enough to make the very industry erase him like a stain. He didn't die from drugs, nor lose his mind to fame. He was destroyed by something colder, the silence of those who once called him brother. In 1992, Corabi stepped into Mötley Crüe during a time of fracture, carrying a blues-drenched voice and a heart broken by a violent childhood. Within just a few years, he turned the world's most notorious band into something else, deeper, darker, more real. But when the 1994 Mötley Crüe album failed because fans refused to accept change, the label ordered, "No Vince Neil, no future." And John Corabi was erased from every page of their history, even from the film The Dirt. This isn't just the story of a singer who was betrayed. It's a confession from an entire industry, one where talent isn't rewarded and where those who are most genuine are the first to be forgotten. But to understand how a man like John Corabi could walk through betrayal, loss, and still stand tall, we have to go back to where it all began. John Corabi was born on April 26, 1959, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, into a humble Italian working-class family where there was no music, no plan for the future, only work and endurance. His father left when the three children were still young, leaving behind a frail but resilient mother who worked 2 jobs, cashier by day, cleaner by night, just to pay rent for their worn-down apartment and put simple meals on the table. Their lives had no warm dinners or laughter, only the long nights filled with police sirens, shouting from alleyways, and the smell of cigarette smoke seeping through the cracked walls. Philadelphia in the 1960s was a harsh city, layoffs, street crime, and a generation growing up in uncertainty. Corabi's childhood wasn't just poor. It was a lesson in learning to stay quiet to survive. At 12, one day he came home early and caught sight of something that would scar him forever. His uncle, the man his mother trusted, was abusing his younger brother. John froze in shock, unable to react, and after that, no one ever spoke of it again. The family buried it in silence, as if it had never happened. But that image never left him. It became an invisible wound, a private pain he carried for life. He never received a proper education. School was a luxury interrupted by the need to earn money and the exhaustion of sleepless nights filled with city noise. He wasn't a standout student, nor did he have any clear career dream. His world was confined to back streets, odd jobs, and days passing by without anyone asking, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" No one taught John how to play music, and no one believed that this quiet boy would ever find his escape through sound. A battered pawn shop guitar and a radio playing The Beatles, Free, and Led Zeppelin. That was his only education. Every night as the city slept, John sat in the corner of his room, strumming chords like speaking to himself. Music didn't come to him as joy, but as survival. A place to release fear, anger, and loneliness he could never name aloud. That harsh childhood forged a voice unlike any other, thick, raspy, yet never screaming. A voice that carried the breath of old wounds. And when he grew older, that very sound, heavy, raw, and born from the dark, would take John Corabi out of the slums of Philadelphia, beginning the long, brutal, and relentless journey of a man who sang simply to stay alive. Music became the only lifeline that kept John Corabi from drowning in a childhood filled with fear. But to turn it into a way of life, he had to wander through nearly a decade of darkness. After leaving school, John did whatever work he could to survive, fixing electrical wiring, delivering goods, or working in small workshops around Philadelphia. By day, he labored. By night, he carried his old guitar to bars, playing for drunks who would never remember his name. It was the early 1980s, a time when the dream of rock seemed reserved only for those with money, connections, or luck. John had none of that, only a will that refused to collapse. It was in those smoky bar gigs that he first found kindred spirits who shared his musical fire. Together, they formed Angora, the first band that gave him a flicker of hope for another kind of future. John's raspy but powerful voice quickly made the group stand out in Philadelphia's underground scene. And soon, they dreamed of a real record deal. But like many young bands of that era, Angora soon fell apart. Not from lack of talent, but from addiction, arguments, and youthful illusions. When the smoke cleared, John was back to square one, carrying the exhaustion of a man who had held his dream only to watch it slip away. Yet that very failure opened the door to a new beginning. In 1989, John Corabi joined forces with Bruce Bouillet and John Alderette, former members of Racer X, along with drummer Scott Travis, who would later join Judas Priest, to form the Scream. This time, John wasn't chasing fame. He simply wanted to make the most honest music possible. Music that mirrored his life. The Scream quickly gained attention in the underground rock circuit for their raw energy and Corabi's gravelly, soulful voice, an emotional sound that stood apart from the shout-to-be-noticed trend of the era. After months of long nights in small studios, they caught the attention of legendary producer Eddie Kramer, the man behind Led Zeppelin and Jimi Hendrix. Kramer agreed to produce their debut album, marking the first real turning point in John's career. The result, Let It Scream, 1991, was a declaration from the last wave of hard rock before the world changed. With its thick, blues-infused sound, fiery riffs, and Corabi's husky, heartfelt vocals, the album radiated the raw survival energy of a musician singing straight from the soul. Songs like Outlaw, Man in the Moon, and Killer embodied everything he believed in. No trends, no polish, just emotion and truth. Critics praised Let It Scream as a criminally overlooked gem, but fate wasn't on their side. As soon as the album hit shelves, the grunge wave from Seattle, Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden swept across the country, washing away everything that sounded classic. Within months, the Scream's heavy, technical hard rock was labeled outdated. Radio stations stopped playing their songs. Promotional budgets were cut, and once again, Corabi found himself arriving too late for glory. But in that loss, destiny began to move. Just as Let It Scream earned a small but loyal following among insiders, one unexpected phone call would change John Corabi's life forever. In early 1992, after escalating conflicts and scandals, Mötley Crüe announced the departure of frontman Vince Neil, a bombshell in the rock world. As rumors swirled about the band's breakup, Nikki Sixx, the group's bassist and creative leader, happened to hear the Scream's album. He was immediately struck by Corabi's voice, thick, real, and full of soul. The very thing Mötley Crüe had been missing: depth and honesty. Not long after, Corabi, still struggling to find a new project, called Nikki's management just to say thank you for praising Let It Scream in an interview. He had no idea that on the other end of the line, the band was desperately searching for a replacement for Vince Neil. A week later, he was invited to Los Angeles for an audition. After a few explosive jam sessions in the rehearsal room, the impossible happened. John Corabi became the new frontman of the biggest band in America. But with triumph came a cruel paradox. Mötley Crüe had just signed a $25 million contract with Elektra Records, a deal that specifically named Vince Neil as the lead vocalist. That meant if they officially announced Corabi, the contract would be void. For months, John worked as a secret singer, recording and writing songs in the shadows, unnamed, unseen, and unacknowledged. Instead of feeling insulted, Corabi treated it as an opportunity to redefine the band's sound. In the studio, he, Nikki Sixx, and guitarist Mick Mars plunged into sleepless nights of experimentation, creating something heavier, deeper, and infused with blues and grunge, music that reflected the maturity and scars of men who had survived fame itself. During that process, John wrote Uncle Jack, a song drawn directly from his childhood trauma, confronting the uncle who had abused his brother and the family's toxic silence. It was the first time in Mötley Crüe's history that a song carried such raw humanity and pain, far removed from their usual tales of sex, alcohol, and rebellion. For Corabi, music was no longer a game. It was a confession, sung by a soul that had endured and dared to face itself. 2 years after those relentless recording sessions in the shadows, the final result was born. In 1994, Mötley Crüe released their self-titled album, Mötley Crüe, a heavy, complex, and arguably the most mature work of their entire career. It was no longer the party anthems they were known for, but a new kind of manifesto, dark, brooding, and deeply introspective. Songs like Misunderstood, Hooligan's Holiday, Till Death Do Us Part, and Uncle Jack carried the spirit of blues and grunge, filled with lyrics torn between loneliness, conflict, and the desperate need to be understood. Critics hailed it as one of the boldest and most genuine albums Mötley Crüe ever made. For the first time, people saw a band willing to grow up, to confront themselves instead of hiding behind decadence. But Elektra Records, the label that had paid $25 million for the image of the wild, hedonistic rock band, was far from pleased. They didn't want a reflective, thoughtful Crüe. They didn't want depth. And they certainly didn't want an unfamiliar voice disrupting a proven formula for profit. Tensions exploded when Nikki Sixx threatened an MTV reporter during a live interview, prompting the network to pull all promotion for the album. Mötley Crüe, 1994, was effectively blacklisted from major media. As a result, sales barely reached 500,000 copies, a devastating figure compared to the 5 million of Dr. Feelgood just a few years earlier. The subsequent tour was nothing short of tragic. Half-empty arenas, unsold tickets, and mounting financial losses. The shows that once ignited stadiums now drew only a few thousand scattered fans, many of whom walked out halfway through. And when the lights went out, both the media and fans found a single scapegoat, John Corabi. He was branded the man who ruined Mötley Crüe, the reason the band had lost its soul. But amid the mockery and accusations, John didn't fight back. He didn't write a rebuttal or lash out in interviews. In one quiet response, he simply said, "I understand why the fans couldn't accept it. I'd probably feel strange too if the voice I grew up with suddenly disappeared." It was a simple statement, but it revealed the mindset of a man who had stood in the eye of the storm. No bitterness, no hatred, only understanding. And from that moment, John Corabi's life entered its harshest chapter, when talent and honesty were buried beneath the success of others. Despite the commercial failure, Mötley Crüe wasn't yet ready to abandon the new sound John had brought them. For all their wounds and criticism, the four men, Nikki Sixx, Mick Mars, Tommy Lee, and Corabi, still believed they were building something bigger than themselves. Throughout 1995 and 1996, they continued writing relentlessly, crafting nearly 80% of what would become the next album, Generation Swine. The music they created retained the rebellious spirit of classic Crue, but with more introspection and emotional depth. qualities Corabi had instilled in them. For John, it was his chance to prove that Mötley Crüe could evolve. Not just live off nostalgia, but be reborn through honesty. But everything collapsed under one cold order from those holding the power. Elektra Records, the same label behind the $25 million deal, delivered a short, merciless message. No Vince Neil, no album. With that one sentence, it was over. No meeting, no warning, no chance to explain. John Corabi was out, quietly, suddenly, as if he had never existed. He didn't even hear it from his bandmates, but from someone in the production team who whispered that Vince Neil was back. And his name had been erased from the project. When Generation Swine was finally released in 1997, John played the CD in his small apartment and barely recognized the work he had poured his soul into. All his vocals had been replaced by Vince Neil. Most of his songwriting, which had made up the majority of the album, had been scrubbed clean, leaving him credited on only 2 tracks, Flush and Let Us Pray. The songs that once held truth and pain were now distorted, reshaped to fit the classic Mötley Crüe image the label wanted to resurrect. Angry and heartbroken, John filed a lawsuit against Mötley Crüe and Elektra Records, demanding $4 million in damages for breach of contract, fraud, and defamation. The case sent shockwaves through the rock industry. No former member had ever dared to challenge the brutal machinery of that system. But like most stories that threaten power, it was quietly buried. No verdict, no justice, and certainly no apology. From the man who had once saved the band from collapse, John Corabi became the one erased from its history. The same magazines that had once praised him now labeled him the guy who sued the Crue, the failed singer, the unwanted replacement. Studio doors that had once opened for him were now closed. The phone stopped ringing. The invitations disappeared. The very industry that had once hailed him as a savior now treated him like a stain to be forgotten. And just like in his childhood, John Corabi had to learn to survive in silence once more. Only this time, his loneliness didn't come from a poor house in Philadelphia, but from the glittering world he had once believed was the dream. Though blacklisted and nearly erased from the rock map, John Corabi did not collapse. When every big door slammed shut, he chose not to complain or drown in bitterness. Instead, he carved out a small path of his own, through his music, through his belief that truth lasts longer than fame. In 1997, when almost no one in the industry would work with him, Corabi reconnected with Bruce Kulick, former guitarist of Kiss, who had also known what it felt like to be replaced. The two men, both veterans of the biggest stages in the world, joined forces to form Union, not for fame, but to prove that honest music could still survive even when no one was listening. Their debut album, Union, 1998, carried the spirit of survivors, classic hard rock, soulful, layered, and haunted by the years they had both lost. Corabi sang with his signature raspy voice, not screaming, but whispering through the pain. Songs like Old Man Wise and Around Again were never radio hits, but they resonated deeply, letting listeners feel the heart of an artist who had been rejected yet refused to disappear. 2 years later came The Blue Room, 2000, darker, more mature, and praised by critics for being fearless and brutally honest. In an age ruled by pop and nu metal, Union became the echo of a fading era, rough, imperfect, but beautiful in its loyalty to authenticity. The band even released a live album, as if to declare they were still there, alive, breathing, and singing, even if no one in the media cared anymore. After Union, Corabi continued a path without a map. He joined ESP, Eric Singer Project, then Rat, then Brides of Destruction with Tracy Guns. Each project was another fragment of the same soul, unpolished, unpretentious, driven by pure passion. Though his time with each band was brief, fans always recognized him. Not by his face, but by that weathered, blues-soaked voice, carrying a lifetime of struggle. It was the voice of a man who had lost everything, yet still dared to walk on stage and sing as if tomorrow might never come. In 2012, Corabi released his solo album, Unplugged, a quiet but profound turning point. Gone were the electric guitars and pounding drums. It was just him, an acoustic guitar, and his stories. The record played like a confession, for all the years of misunderstanding, betrayal, and his silence during the storm. Unplugged never made the charts, but it touched those who had once been broken, because John Corabi wasn't singing to sell. He was singing to survive. Then fate called his name once more. From 2015 to 2019, Corabi became the lead singer of the Dead Daisies, an international supergroup featuring members of Guns N' Roses, Whitesnake, and INXS. With them, he recorded 3 albums: Revolution, 2015, Make Some Noise, 2016, and Burn It Down, 2018. This was his true rebirth. Corabi infused the Dead Daisies with the rawness of experience, the ferocity of a soul once crushed, and the blues rock grit that made the band stand apart. Their tours across Europe, South America, and Japan didn't just restore his name. They proved something undeniable. The voice once rejected by Mötley Crüe was now inspiring thousands to rise and cheer. But after hundreds of nights on the road, Corabi began to wear down. In 2019, he left the band to find balance, returning to his family and the simple life he'd been denied for so long. Yet music never left him. And by 2023, he reunited with the Dead Daisies for the Light 'Em Up tour. This time, not to prove anything, but simply to enjoy the journey he once lost. Nearly 3 decades after being cast out of Mötley Crüe, John Corabi finally reclaimed his place, not through spotlights, awards, or fame, but through the respect of listeners and the inner peace he had spent a lifetime seeking. Each song now stands not as a lament, but as testimony to a life that was beaten, buried, and still rose again. And from here begins the final chapter, where the man once forgotten has learned to live in peace, not in noise, but in the gentle light of truth, the only thing he has never betrayed. Amid all the rises and falls, what's truly remarkable is that John Corabi's personal life remained untouched by scandal or gossip. In the rock world, where parties, drugs, and affairs were often the backstage norm, Corabi chose a quieter path. No noise, no headlines. Perhaps after everything he had endured, he understood that the most precious thing wasn't the spotlight, but a home that didn't need to prove itself to anyone. Corabi has one son, Ian Corabi, who also followed a musical path. Ian never sought fame from his father's name. Instead, he built his own reputation within the independent rock scene. The two were once distant, especially during John's early touring years, when he drifted from one band to another, living the restless life of a musician without roots. But over time, the distance healed, not through apologies, but through music. They have shared small stages together in Nashville, father and son standing side by side, performing the songs that had carried them both through years of struggle. In love, Corabi was not spared from heartbreak. He was briefly married in the early 2000s, but the union dissolved quickly, partly due to endless touring and partly because he was still too unsettled after years of professional loss. It wasn't until he met Debbie Sorensen, a woman outside the entertainment world, that he finally found his anchor. They met in the early 2010s at a small gathering of mutual friends in Nashville, where John had settled. Debbie wasn't drawn to his fame, but to his humility, and the weary eyes of a man who had once stood on top of the world, only to fall hard. They married in 2014, and since then, Debbie has become his most steadfast source of peace. She often accompanies him on tour, taking care of his health and helping him maintain a sense of balance on the road. Corabi has said that thanks to her, he learned to slow down, that not every artist is lucky enough to find someone patient enough to love both their fragile and imperfect sides. Still, the scars of being cast out by Mötley Crüe never fully faded. Corabi once fell into depression, feeling as though he'd been erased from the world, left without a place in the industry. He questioned his own worth, wondering whether all the effort, honesty, and loyalty he'd given to music had meant anything at all. Yet instead of numbing the pain with alcohol or drugs, the path so many of his peers had taken, Corabi turned inward, to meditation, writing, and small stages. In recent years, he has performed intimate acoustic shows, with only a few dozen people in attendance, warm, quiet spaces where he shares stories of the past, lessons from failure, and moments of silence. In that simplicity, he rediscovered himself, no longer the rejected singer, no longer the man who sued the Crue, but a man who had learned to forgive himself. Now, past 60, John Corabi says he no longer needs the crowd, only a few who truly listen. As he once told the audience at a small Tennessee show, "I don't need a crowd, I just need a few people who believe I'm really singing." A simple sentence, yet it holds the weight of an entire life's journey. From the blinding lights of Mötley Crüe to a quiet room where he sings only for himself. And in that very place, John Corabi finally found what fame, money, and the past never could give him: true peace. In his 60s, John Corabi still refuses to rest. After years of quiet reflection and intimate tours filled with emotion, 2024 marked his return to the road with the Dead Daisies on the Light 'Em Up tour, a series of concerts across Europe and the US, celebrating the band's long-awaited reunion. These weren't massive super band shows anymore, but modest venues where fans came not out of curiosity, but because they truly wanted to hear his voice. That same voice once rejected, now rising again with pride. Each performance was a reminder that while time can fade fame, it can never extinguish an artist's faith in himself. As 2025 begins, Corabi continues alongside the band with their upcoming album, Looking for Trouble, a project steeped in blues and classic rock, set for release in late May. It's not chasing trends, but returning to roots, to the raw, unfiltered soul of rock and roll. Here, Corabi's voice no longer screams for validation. It tells stories, the kind only someone who has survived storms can tell. The band's promotional tour spans Europe with stops in Nashville, Belfast, Oslo, Porsgrunn, and Zurich, cities that once witnessed him at his peak, now welcoming him back with something far rarer: belated respect. In recent interviews, Corabi revealed he's gathering material for a new solo record, a genre-blending project weaving together acoustic, blues, and hard rock. After years of running from his past, he now wants to embrace it all, to write the songs he once wasn't calm enough to sing. And perhaps now, with no pressure to top charts or please record executives, John Corabi is finally himself, an artist free, grounded, and honest to the core. Every step he takes in 2024-2025 is no longer toward fame, but toward something he once lost and fought a lifetime to regain: respect from his audience, his peers, and above all, from himself. More than half a century since leaving that cramped apartment in Philadelphia, John Corabi has still never been called a legend, but he's never needed to be. His legacy doesn't lie in record sales or stage records, but in the endurance of a man the world once cast aside, who chose truth over illusion. If Mötley Crüe symbolized the excess and chaos of the 1980s, then Corabi represents the other side of rock, where pain, loss, and quiet pride forge something achingly real. He doesn't shout. He doesn't play the rebel. He simply sings, as if it's the only way left to stay alive. That honesty has turned his voice, thick, raspy, and shadowed, into a gentle rain amid an era of technical screams. Many younger musicians, from independent bands in America to across Europe, still cite Corabi as a symbol of perseverance, because he proved that even when you're erased from official history, you can still rewrite your story, through music, through time, and through an unbroken will to exist. His memoir, Horseshoes and Hand Grenades, 2022, isn't a complaint or lament, but a dialogue with his past, a journey of forgiving others, and ultimately forgiving himself. Now, at 66, John Corabi still stands on stage, not to chase back the spotlight, but to share the warmth of truth with those who once lost faith in music. He is living proof that rock never dies, because as long as there are people like him, as long as there are souls brave enough to sing after being forgotten, it will always live on. And perhaps that is the most beautiful victory an artist can have. Not to make the world bow, but to make it fall silent and listen. So, what do you think? Can a man once erased from history become an eternal symbol simply by never stopping to sing his truth? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to follow us, so we can keep telling the stories that were never told.